Before we begin today, I wanted to just let you know that if you're wondering what's going on with the Ravi scandal and all of that, then I would highly recommend that you go check out a video by Mike Winger where he lays out everything that Ravi Zacharias did, at least according to a report that came out. And I just highly recommend going and checking that out if you're curious in some of the background of what this conversation is all about today. But today I've got Alisa Childers and Dr. Liz Jackson to come on to Capturing Christianity and just to share their hearts on this really tragic and unfortunate situation that we find ourselves in. And so, yeah, this is it's not going to be easy. It's it's challenging, but let's just get into. So, Alisa, I just wanted to start and open the floor to you and just let you share what's on your mind, what's on your heart, because with Ravi Zacharias, I was listening to a video that you did with him, or that you did on the situation, is that he was a kind of intellectual hero for you, and he helped you through a really serious period of doubt in your own life, and so this is very personal for you. So I just wanted to open the floor to you, just share what's on your heart about this.
Yeah, thanks, Cameron. And I just also want to second your recommendation to watch Mike Winger's video. It is incredibly clarifying. If anyone is confused at all about what exactly is going on, what has come out, what the accusations are, what the proof is, Mike will walk you through all of that. And I love that Mike just has such a pastor's heart about it. So again, I just recommend that as well. But yeah, so this is personal for me in a lot of ways. I don't want to over exaggerate that. I have the benefit of having been raised by parents who, actually my dad was a public Christian in the Christian music industry. So I was taught from a very young age not to put people on pedestals, not to idolize them or to make them into some kind of a hero, that I'm depending on that person more than Christ. And so while this was incredibly painful to learn that all of these accusations were in fact true and beyond what we had even heard before or whatever had come out in the past, the reality is way, way, way worse. So yeah, certainly that was painful. But Cameron, on your show 2 or 3 years ago, I think a couple years ago, I shared my story with your audience about how I had gone through a really intense time of doubt and deconstruction, and I didn't know where to turn. I didn't know who could answer some of the questions that had come up that had caused my faith to just be so rocked. And I cried out to God one night, just begging God to send somebody who could answer some of the questions that I couldn't find answers for. And I think I even said in that interview with you that the first voice I heard that offered answers to some of the questions I had was the voice of Ravi Zacharias. And so I've shared many times that I listened to his 15-minute broadcast every day for a year, just at that very beginning of God reconstructing my faith in Jesus and basically bringing apologetics and evidence into my life to show me that the Christian worldview is not only not unreasonable, but there's really good evidence to support it. And so, yeah, Ravi's words were a huge part of that journey, then getting connected to seminaries and other apologists and things like that. So yeah, this is something that it's devastating. And it's devastating for me as an apologist. And this is why I made the video I did. I had put faith in Jesus long before I ever heard the name Ravi Zacharias. And so, it doesn't rock my faith to know that this guy was living this double life. It's it does expose some things I think that the church needs to take a hard look at, because this isn't the only scandal that we've seen come out in the last few years. And so it's definitely something that we need to look at. But yeah, I guess that's we can go beyond that if you'd like to, but essentially that's my story. I never met Ravi personally. I never met him in person, or had any connection to him in that way. But yeah, the words that he spoke, it's true that those were like a lifeboat to me when I was drowning in doubt, which, you know, as we all know, the nature of truth, something can be true spoken by somebody who is an abuser or a sinner. It can still speak true things. It doesn't make the message false. Because that's how truth works. But yeah, it's really sad. It's very hard. And I know that I know people who came to Christ because of a Ravi book or a sermon or something that they heard. And so, yeah, it hits hard, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that that I think about with all of this is because Ravi was never, for me in my own personal journey, he wasn't one of these people who I was reading all the time and getting a lot of things out of. Like I watched some of his videos, but I remember thinking that it just, completely aside from all of this other stuff, he just struck me as a little bit too poetic. And so if to put it in perspective for me, I often think of like, what would it be? Because William Lane Craig is like, that's sort of the guy for me, like the intellectual hero of mine. Yeah. So I think about oftentimes like, what if it were him that this kind of stuff was coming out about? Like that would just be completely devastating for me. And I can't imagine what that's like for people who were just, reading his work and getting so much out of it. It's mind blowing. And I think this is, Liz and I are in a similar boat here, that Ravi was never a kind of intellectual hero. He didn't play a real big part in your intellectual journey at all. But Liz, what is your perspective on this?
Yeah. So, like you said, for me personally, Ravi, I had heard of him and I wasn't, opposed to him, but he just wasn't someone that I looked up to in the way that I look up to other people, including some contemporary philosophers. And I like that point, Cam. It's like, it helps you empathize with people, because even if you don't look up to Ravi, imagine if this happened to one of your heroes. I mean, that's super hard. And I do think we have to cling to the truth that Jesus is the one we follow. Jesus is the one. Jesus is our ultimate hero and our ultimate role model. But I think at the same time, we should also acknowledge role models play a really important role in our lives. And when one of your role models isn't just not who you thought he was, but is a total fraud, I mean, that is heartbreaking and heart-wrenching. And so I think that's important to acknowledge. And I think the other thing I wanted to say too is that even though Ravi wasn't one of my personal role models, just the reality of this situation is so difficult and has affected me personally in so many ways. And I often don't get that nervous for live streams like this, but I am actually really nervous for this one because of how difficult this is to talk about. And I think the biggest thing that I want to do is just do justice to the victims, do justice to what they're going through, what they've gone through. And I want to encourage everyone to make this about them. And I think we need to listen to them. We need to take their perspective seriously. We need to mourn with them. Don't make this about Ravi. Don't make this about what is the atheist going to say. Make this about them. And that's why both of you said you really liked Mike's video. I really liked it too. And I thought Mike did a really good job of drawing us to kind of look at their perspective. That was, I guess, some kind of preliminary things I wanted to say. Yeah, go ahead, Cam.
Well, I wanted to talk about for a little while and just get y'all's thoughts on this. I mean, what is it like, or what would it be? I don't know if either of you have actually been personally like involved in anything like this, but I can see why there would be, I can understand why victims wouldn't want to come forward with information about something like this. Liz, is that something that you had prepared to talk about? Is like some of the like psychological reasons and like think, because I knew that. So I was sharing some of this Ravi stuff before before the RZIM ministries had started to do their investigation and were coming out saying that, hey, they're going to actually start to take some of these things a lot more seriously. And I would post things that I found online that were very, very questionable about Ravi. And anytime I would post anything like that, I was just met with like, I even had people, I'm not going to throw anyone under the bus, but I had people threatening to like stop donating to the ministry because I was like slandering Ravi Zacharias. So I'm just like, I'm completely disconnected from this guy, yet I'm still feeling personally the effects of what it would feel like to, sort of challenge. So I mean, in a small way, I've kind of experienced that myself, but I can just imagine it's got to be just so much worse for someone who's actually been affected by it. But any thoughts on that, either Elisa or Liz?
Well, I will just say, I know that Liz has some kind of important stuff to share as well. But I think that for a lot of us, because everybody heard about the one, Lorianne Thompson coming out in 2017, everybody heard about that. But at that time, Ravi was alive. And so it seemed, and I know Liz is going to speak to this as well. And I want to learn from what Liz has to say as well. But, and by the way, I am so happy that she is being vindicated now. I just want to say that, like, I am so happy that the truth has come out. That was my main prayer, because back then when it was, as far as I knew, it was this one woman making this accusation, and then Ravi was still alive, and he was posting, she's trying to extort money from the ministry. And I'll be honest with you, I was confused, because I've been a public Christian long enough. Since I was 25 years old in the music business, I know that people make stuff up about you. That used to happen all the time. So it was very confusing to try to figure out what is the truth. And so I know for a lot of people, it was sort of taking the posture of, I was praying, God, if this is true, please let more women come forward. Please. And I, it's like, please let there be testimony established by witnesses, because I wanted the truth to come out. And that is one of the things I thank God for so much every day, is thank you, God, that you made it so clear that it didn't have to be confusing to know the truth about what was going on. And I'm just a truth person. I want the truth, whether it's comfortable for me or not. And so for that, I am so thankful. So I along with, I think lots of others, were waiting to see what the investigation would produce. And thankfully, it produced just a tremendous amount of evidence that not only was she correct in her accusation against him, but so many more as well.
Liz, what about you?
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to just totally agree. I love that prayer, and I think that's a really great way to look at it, is say we want the truth to come out. We want to see the truth. And I think one thing, and I might circle back to this again later, but one of the biggest things I wanted to encourage people is to follow the evidence, look at where the evidence leads, and don't believe something or disbelieve something just because you want it to be true or don't want it to be true. And I think this is a case where I think a lot of people have looked at this evidence and said, this is undeniable. But I think at the same time, it's easy to let our desires get in the way and say, there's no way he could have done this. There's no way this could be true. And then I want you to really ask yourself, are you looking at the evidence, or are you believing something that you want to be true? So I just love your heart for the truth. And I think we should all seek to have that same heart. I think the other thing I wanted to say, and I think this is just related to kind of women when they're in this kind of situation. I think it's hard for us to fully see what it's like to be in that place from that perspective. And I think there's a couple things to say here. The first is that there's actually a lot of costs to making these kinds of accusations. Victims of these sort of things have a lot of incentives to remain silent. First of all, I mean, it's just painful and often embarrassing to tell people what happened to you when you're the victim of this kind of thing. And like you pointed out, the people that you're often making these accusations against are often people that are well respected, that have a lot of power. That makes it really difficult. And because of that, there's often fear that there'll be repercussions and consequences, social and professional consequences, like Lorianne Thompson, for example, and then the way that Ravi just dismissed her, but he was able to do that because of the amount of power that he had. And I think it's really honorable and awesome that she was able to have that courage to speak out against him. But it's so sad that because of how much power he had, he was basically able to convince people that she was lying or just trying to extort money from him or whatever. And so I just think it's important to really think about these women from their perspective, how difficult it is to come out and say this kind of thing, and how embarrassing it is, and how shameful it is. And if people believe you, then you're a rape victim. If people don't believe you, then you're a liar. I mean, that's a really tough situation. And so I think it's just, let's think about what it would be like to be a victim, and let's think about their perspective. And I just want to encourage people, I think, to not make it again about Ravi, and to not make it about, other people. Make it about these women and what they've gone through, and try to think about what that would be like. It's really hard to, but I think we can at least try.
Yeah, there's a lot more that we have planned to talk about. At least Liz, you've got planned to talk about with I think it's called the philosophy of like rape allegations, and the epistemology of testimony and everything, and all of that. There's like some really important stuff that we want to get to. But Alisa, I want to just sort of swing back to around to something that you were talking about in your video, in that when you've got, like, when one of your heroes is shown to be just a complete moral scoundrel, like, where do you go? Like, what was your thought process like? Like, was it just devastating for a couple of days, and then you were just like, okay, yeah, I mean, I maybe I put too much focus on this guy, like I should have been putting that on Jesus. Like, what did you know, what was that like? What was that experience like?
Well, this is an interesting question, because I almost feel like this makes me sound cold-hearted, but I actually didn't personally feel devastated about it. The tension in my own soul, and I mean angst, utter just distress in my own soul, was just wanting to know what was true. So that was, in fact, I actually feel emotionally thinking about it, because the distress of thinking, okay, if I believe this, then I could potentially be slandering an innocent man who, with a 45-year, ministry history. If I don't believe it, or if I go the other direction, then, I could be gaslighting this woman who's saying this is true. So that tension was the biggest tension for me. Because I really, in fact, that was my prayer. Like, Lord, if this is true, please, please, please let it all come out. Let this investigation show that this is all true. Because up until the time Ravi died, the only accusation I had heard was Lorianne Thompson, just the one. And I think that a lot of people were just so confused about it. It seemed like a he said, she said situation. Who do you give the benefit of the doubt to? It was incredibly confusing. I think that there were a lot of people who felt that way. Of course, it was very hard to believe, and this is where the Lord used this even in my own life to bring some humility about in a couple of areas, because I thought I had a pretty good, smell test with people. I thought that, I had a pretty good grip on, if somebody's got something that's like that, but I was so shocked. I didn't see it with Ravi. I did not even get just even the slightest hint of that from him. So that also added to the confusion, because it was like, I didn't see this coming. It was very hard to believe when you hear this man saying these things on one hand, and then you're hearing these other accusations come out. And so I think confusion was huge, but that main angst in my soul, and admittedly, I'm sure my initial instinct was to defend him. And this is something I think that as a church, as a people, we all need to really I've given so much thought, even just in the last few days, even like, there has to be systems in place. There has to be something in place so that if a really serious accusation like this comes out against someone, there needs to be some kind of a system in place where an investigation can happen, an independent investigation, because if that person's innocent, the investigation is going to show that if their smartphones are confiscated and it's all clear, that's going to be fairly easy to prove. And on the other hand, if they're hiding something, if there's truth to the allegations, then that can be easily found out too. So I think that's going to require public Christians, people to say, look, I am going to say, like, if some kind of massive accusation like this comes out, I'm going to submit myself to an independent investigation. I don't know any other way to move forward, because I will say this: spiritual abuse, not just sexual, but abuses of power, this is tearing the church apart. I know friends who have been through horrific abuses of power from highly platformed pastors, and they're not believed. Generally speaking, a few people will believe them, but people tend, in our sinful nature, we tend to rally around the guy with the powerful anointing, or whatever we want to call it. That's our nature, is to protect that person rather than these bloody sheep who are crying out for somebody to listen to them. And I've watched this wreck people's faith. And so, it's not just the Ravi. I mean, Ravi's sort of like this extreme, it seems like, example. And if anybody's watching and you still haven't heard all of the accusations, read the report or watch Mike Winger's video. This isn't just, a moral failing. This is serial, predatory sexual abuse of women that went on for years and years and years. And so, Robbie's sort of, in a way, I'm thankful to God for letting the light shine on it, because we always want the light to shine on these kinds of things. So and this is just where my heart is the gospel is the answer to this. I mean, just look at the way Jesus treated women versus the way Ravi treated women. We're putting our trust and we're following Jesus. And I was just this morning reading from Luke 7, where Jesus is invited to this Pharisee's house to eat. And, if you look at some of the context, it really kind of seems like the Pharisee's really trying to trap him. He's trying to get him in a situation where he can, they can prove that that he doesn't have the answer, that he's going to do something that's immoral or uncouth, or, and so this prostitute basically comes in. He says, "Behold, a woman of the city who was a sinner." And, this is the famous story. She pours the oil on Jesus' feet, and her tears leak down onto his feet. She's wiping them with her hair. She's kissing his feet. And if you look at the way Jesus dealt with her, where he defends her, he forgives her sins. And I think about all these women in this report, and I think Ravi's the one guy in their life that should have been the one saying, "No, you are worth more than this. You are made in the image and likeness of God." He's the one who should have been speaking that into their lives, but instead, he used them, he abused them, and I appreciate Mike in his video also just speaking to Ravi's family. It's hard. I can't imagine if this was my dad or my husband. I mean, we have to have compassion for the people who were really closest to Ravi, because they're victims too. And I'm glad Mike spoke that, because even if there was knowledge, or I don't know, still there's a grooming process that happens with abusers. And so, I just have such compassion for his family. And I've thought about that. Like, what if this was my dad? What if this was my husband? And so I think that that's a good juxtaposition to think about too, is the way Jesus treated women versus the way Ravi treated women. And we have our answer. The gospel is not the problem. There's something about celebrity culture. I don't know if it's the megachurch model. I don't know what it is. There's something that's broken and sinful in the way we're doing something, but it's not the gospel. The gospel is not the problem. The gospel is the answer. Just look at how Jesus was with women, and women who were already of, what you would say ill repute or something along those lines. But that's just kind of what I've been thinking about, especially in the last couple of days.
That is really, really good. Liz, I wanted to say that your microphone might be muted. It looks like it's muted in the back end here, so I don't know if you can unmute that yourself. If you can't, I've ran into this problem before. You may have to hop back out and hop back in. But yeah, Elisa, what you were saying about there could be something wrong with this this mega church pastor kind of vibe. Like, I don't know if that was ever something that was intended to be the case, or I don't know. And it actually kind of scares me. Let me actually just ping Liz back in here, see if that worked. Okay, yeah, I think that worked, Liz. So
yeah.
So
I think my talking and I must have, yeah, anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, no worries. No worries. I was just talking about the fact that like this mega church model, and like it kind of scares me because that's kind of like what YouTube is. And like you've got this YouTube channel. Some of these people have hundreds of thousands of subscribers and they tune in. Even someone like Mike Winger, you've got all of these people listening to you. That actually really scares me. That, you know, if that's what the issue is, you know, what kind of things can we put in place to sort of combat this? But Liz, what did you have any thoughts on?
Cameron? Hey, Cameron, before we jump to Liz, I just want to say to you, I just to give people some hope about things. I have learned that there are a lot of ministries who are learning from this. They are instituting certain accountability structures and things to, I know of several, especially in the apologetics realm, who are trying really hard to put those things into place. So I think that, you know, there is hope in that way. But also, you know, you mentioned the megachurch model, or I did. It's also, there are so many churches that don't operate under a biblical definition of how they're supposed to be governed. And that's part of the problem too, where you get this high level celebrity pastor who, even if he has a board, the board might just be a bunch of yes men who are paid staff members or something along those lines. They're not going to stand up to him. They're not going to say no to him. So I think that's another thing too, is even for churches, what we can learn from this is to make sure that our governmental structures are biblical, that it's elder led, that there isn't just one guy that calls the shots. That's just something that's ripe for disaster. So I'm sorry, go ahead, Liz. I want to hear your thoughts as well.
No, that's beautiful. I agree with everything you've said. I think it's really wise and really helpful. And I think too, just remembering that people can seem so great and so innocent and like they would never ever do this, but no one is above that accountability. And I think we just put people on pedestals and we give them so much power and we trust them so much. And with Ravi, people were saying, like, he's just so innocent that even inappropriate things that he was saying, he was so innocent, he didn't even realize they were inappropriate. And they were just giving him this massive benefit of the doubt. And I think I love that you said that we're learning from this. And I think that's one of the things we should learn is like, we just can't assume that, you know, these people are innocent and perfect, even if they seem amazing and everything they say sounds biblical and great. We need those accountability structures. We need, like you said, to have a biblical model where there's not just an appearance of accountability, but there's real accountability. And it's, you know, I heard about women that, or people that tried to speak up and they were just gaslighted and they were, their perspective was ignored and they were shushed. And it was like, of course, Ravi would never do that. Are you kidding me? And, you know, Lorianne Thompson was one, but there was many, is my understanding. And we just can't do that. And that's, I think, one of the big lessons we have to take away from that is we need to take people's perspective seriously. And especially when they speak out against people in power, we need to realize that's something we need to take seriously. And I like what you said, we should investigate it. And what's interesting too, I was doing a little bit of research for this, looking at some of, like Cam said, there's this literature on the epistemology of rape accusations, but also the epistemology of testimony is really relevant for this too. But one thing that's really interesting is that a lot of false accusations actually get overturned quite quickly once you just look into them, you know? And so I think the problem is that oftentimes these people are shushed or shunned and people won't look into these. And that's a huge issue and something that I hope we can learn from what's happened.
Yeah. So actually, I would like to turn, Liz, to the two things that you wanted to talk about. But before we do that, I wanted to give Elisa a chance. Is there anything that you had planned to say or wanted to say, get off your chest before we move on? And I'm sure that you'll want to interact with what Liz has to say as well. But is there anything else that you'd like to say before we switch over to that?
Yeah, I did. I wanted to read a little paragraph here from a piece my friend Catherine Sterling over at defendthefaithministry.com wrote, because it's something that really provoked me to thought quite a bit. And if anyone's unfamiliar with the charges, I'll give you a little context before I read this. Part of what Ravi did when he would sexually abuse these women was he would, even with, I think it was a couple of the different women, he would actually pray with them and thank God that, like, he would call her his reward for a job well done, or, you know, this time in ministry. And he would actually bring God into it, in the sense that he would pray and thank God for, you know, this experience that they
This
had
opportunity
together.
or something.
Yeah, this opportunity was the word that he used. And so my friend Catherine wrote this, and I think this is really powerful. She said, but Ravi didn't just abuse his own power and reputation, he abused the very name of God. In the words of Dennis Prager, an articulate Old Testament and Hebrew scholar, the violation of the third commandment is not just saying the Lord's name in vain, but carrying the Lord's name into our sin. Ironically, I heard him speak this at an event alongside Ravi. And this report describes Ravi as justifying his sexual abuse of these women with prayer and God's blessing. Ravi has blasphemed the very name of God that he preached by carrying it into his sexual sin. This should bother every Christian. And the reason I wanted to bring this up, that's an end quote there. I think this is a very important point because one of the responses I've seen from a lot of Christians, and look, I understand this instinct to say something like this. I don't want anybody who has said something like this to feel stupid or shamed. We're all trying to figure this out. Like we are all trying to do that. So please don't feel shamed. But one of the common things I've seen people bring up is like, well, hey, we're all sinners. We all have sin. Look at David and Bathsheba and all these things. And it's almost like it's not that they're necessarily excusing his sin, but they're saying, look, we all sin. Yes, that is true. We do all sin. We all struggle with sin. I'm sure that there are patterns of sin even that we are all fighting against in our lives. But I just want to create a couple of categories here to maybe help people think through. This is how it's helped me to think through this because I do that too. The first thing I do is look at myself and say, well, I know there are things that I struggle with. Who am I to, condemn someone else or whatever? And there's always that kind of instinct to look inward and say, well, I need to repent of my own sin. I need to make sure that my heart is clean and all of that stuff. And I think that's good. We should be doing that. But we need to create a couple of categories here. First of all, there in this particular type of sin, there are victims. There are people whose lives have been completely upended by this. And again, Mike Winger he plays a lot of Lorianne Thompson's victim impact statement, what happened to her life because of all this. And then there are a great many more women who haven't even given their names. They don't necessarily want people to know who they are. I don't blame them. I mean, it's like Liz mentioned, it's embarrassing. It's difficult to bring things like this out. There's probably a whole bunch of knots tangled up of shame and questioning their own everything. I mean, because that's part of the nature of this type of abuse is it makes you question your own sanity. That grooming process will do things like that. I'm no expert, but that's just my observations. But the category of sin that this involves is one that victimizes other people. So that's a different category in the sense that we can't just brush it aside as, oh, this is just sin everybody struggles with, because there are actually people whose lives have been upended. And we as the church need to be there for them, as you mentioned, Liz. But then even a bigger category, a higher category in a way, is that Ravi brought God into this. This wasn't a man saying, oh, I'm so ashamed of what I've done. I just, I'm caught in this pattern. Somebody help me. It wasn't like that. This is somebody actually using the name of God to not just justify, but to bless his abusive and predatory type sins that create victims. So there is a different category. Every pastor struggles with sin, certainly, but we need to take a slightly different look at it if it's the type of sin that actively victimizes other people. So I just thought that Catherine had such good thoughts there about this is like not even just abuse. This is actually taking the name of the Lord in vain in the name of your abuse, which is, it raises that to a different category in my view.
Liz, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think one point that Mike makes really well in his video is a lot of Christians say, and I even grew up in circles where we were taught something like all sins are the same or something, all sins are the same in God's eyes, or sin is sin or whatever. And I think you've just brought up really nicely, Alicia, how, there's nowhere in the Bible that says that. There's not a Bible verse that says all sins are the same or all sins are equally bad. We all have sinned, we all are sinners, but that's very different than saying all sins are the same. And yeah, I think you've brought up really nicely ways in which this sin is so serious and so horrible. And it's so hard for me to even think about the ways that Ravi used spirituality and prayer and things like that to manipulate and victimize and confuse and gaslight these women. It's disgusting. And as as someone who cares about women, as a Christian, as just a human being with a moral compass, I it's hard to even talk about because of how gross and horrible it is. So we all are sinners and we all sin, but all sins are not the same. And I think this is an especially disgusting category of sin. So
we did get a question. We did get a question in, and I think that it will, it's relevant to some of the things that we're already saying right here. So Finding Truth says, thank you, Cam, Elisa, and Liz. What is your response to those saying that we should just move on since Ravi is dead and can't, quote unquote, defend himself?
Well, I mean, it's kind of like what I said before. Actually, you know who has a really good perspective on this is David Wood. I don't know if the two of you saw David's video, but David Wood put out a video about Ravi, and he kind of made the point as far as like he can't defend himself because he's dead. Well, David basically said, if I die and somebody finds a bunch of bodies in the crawl space under my house, and then all of the evidence shows that I murdered all those people, like, do we just move on because I'm not here to defend myself because I'm dead? And when you kind of see it in that perspective, it's kind of, that it's just not a valid point. And again, I understand why people say these things. I would encourage anybody who thinks that, pray and ask the Lord to shine light, to show you truth, to be a truth seeker. I know that we're all trying to process through this in the best way we can. It's going to be messy. There's not going to be an easy way to process through this. So I don't want you to feel, like you're stupid for thinking that. But sin is sin, and just because somebody dies doesn't mean that sin goes away or that it doesn't matter anymore, especially when you're leaving hundreds of victims behind. And I think that's kind of the big point there is you have a bunch of women. Think about this for the Christian out there watching this, because that's where my heart is. Like, I know atheists are going to say, oh, Christianity is all bunk and, this proves it or whatever. That's fine. I'm not talking to the atheists right now. I'm talking to the Christians here. I know how hard this is to process. But we have to be truth seekers first. And we have to know that this isn't the fault of the gospel. This isn't Jesus' fault. In fact, Jesus opposes this. The gospel opposes what Ravi did. It actually has quite a bit to say about things like that. And so that Jesus and the gospel are the answer, not the cause or the problem. Ravi's the one who abused people, who disobeyed the teachings of Jesus, disobeyed the teachings of the Bible and the gospel. So, that's on him. But as far as just saying we need to move on because he's dead, I just want you to think about something. When you say something like that, who are you thinking about? I want you to think of yourself from a pastor's perspective. Okay. Are you worried about Ravi, or are you worried about the hundreds of women who are now probably spiritually incredibly confused? These women who maybe he even preached the gospel to them and then integrated it into this sexual abuse and the grooming. Who are you thinking about? Because if you're a pastor and that woman comes into your church, you need to affirm her, what she's telling you. You need to believe her. You need to say, that was wrong. That was sinful. That was a man abusing the name of the Lord, not using it the way it's intended. And your heart, I think that as Christians, we need to shift. And I like what Liz said, we need to shift our view. This isn't about Ravi. We don't want to just keep focusing on Ravi. Actually, especially now that he is gone, we need to shift our focus to his victims, which includes his family. A lot of wonderful people that work at RZIM that are just probably trying to figure out what's going to happen next. There's a lot of victims that are left in the wake of this. And so the reason we can't just move on is because we care about those people. We love those people. And the gospel has an answer for those people who are still here, who are still alive, and who probably have a long road of healing ahead.
So on the note of the victims, there's actually another comment super chat that came in from April Parker. She says, a lot of times these victims' voices go unheard so often. Thank you all for shedding light on this so that they can heal. And I just wanted to give an opportunity, Elisa or Liz, what kind of like words of encouragement do you have for people, not just that were victimized by Ravi, but who've been victimized by other people? What kind of words of encouragement do you have for them?
Do you have anything, Liz? Or
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. It's really difficult. And you're not at fault, and you're not to blame. And I think a lot of times you're up against a powerful person who's often trying to confuse you and hurt you. And trust yourself. Don't let them shape reality for you. Like you said, Elisa, like a lot of times there's gaslighting, and they're trying to tell you the truth, to manipulate you and to make you not see the truth anymore. So it's so difficult. I don't know the biggest thing I want to say is we need to learn from this. We need to do better as churches. We need to do better, and hopefully we can do better, and hopefully that can be an encouragement to victims and to people that are struggling. That I really, really hope we can learn from this and do better. But it's hard, and I don't know if I have a lot to say other than let's do better. Let's do better for the victims, and because of what they've gone through.
And I would just add too, if by any chance a victim of Ravi's is watching this right now, I just want you to know that we love you. Jesus loves you. Look all throughout Scripture at how Jesus interacted with women. And I know that there are a lot of complicated reasons that led you to the place that you're at right now. And it's probably a big mixture of shame. It's probably a big mixture of just all sorts of different emotions. Maybe you genuinely loved him. Maybe you had really connected with him on a level that not only now are you dealing with realizing that you were abused and played and used, but now you're having to figure out your own feelings in that whole thing. I don't know. I'm sure it's different for every person, but I want you to know that Jesus loves you. And whenever Jesus interacted with women, he showed women respect. So much respect. He shared the gospel with women. He did things in the first century culture that no man would have done. The view of women in that first century Roman Empire was really, really negative. And Jesus broke all of those boundaries. And I'm even thinking about the woman at the well. She's there in the middle of the day, which would really indicate that the other women probably didn't like her for some reason. Jesus tells her, you've had 5 husbands. The man you're with right now isn't your husband. And he loved her. And he shared his living water with her. He gave her the living water, and he has that for you too. And so that's my heart. My heart is for Christians. I don't want you to lose your faith over this. There's no reason to lose your faith over this. In fact, the fact that this happened, this is what the Bible says is going to happen. The Bible says there will be people who are lovers of themselves more than lovers of God. There will be people that will say, but Lord, I cast out demons in your name. I did all these things. And Jesus said, I never knew you. Now, I'm not going to judge Ravi's soul. I don't know. God knows. That's between he and God. But we know that this is going to happen. People are going to become lovers of themselves. The Bible just predicts this. And we have a category for this. This category is called sin. And this is where Jesus offers his free gift of salvation through repentance. And I think it's a wake-up call for leaders, for pastors, for all of us who have some kind of a platform to make sure that our accountability structures are in place. And like Mike Winger made the point in his video, or maybe it was David, I can't remember which one, but accountability only works with people who submit themselves to actually be accountable, because you can say you have accountability and still not tell people what's going on. This is how Ravi was able to say, hey, I do the Mike Pence rule. I'm never alone with a woman, except for the massage therapist that travels with me because of my bad back. And so everybody kind of just let that go because they just assumed he was doing what he said, and he wasn't. And so Yeah, I guess I don't know, I'm probably rambling now, but it's just heartbreaking on all levels.
Yeah. All right. Well, why don't we turn now to what Liz had planned to talk about? And one of the reasons for doing that, I was watching the live chat right now, and a person named Dev says, for personal reasons, I have a really hard time accepting allegations unless I can see the proof myself. And Liz, you've got a lot to say about this, so why don't we go ahead and turn to that now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess there was just a couple things, and you might wonder, like, why would Cam even have me on here? But part of it is because one of the issues involved here. So I'm an epistemologist. So epistemologists study knowledge, they study rational belief, and one of the big questions in epistemology is, what should we believe and who should we believe? And that question is very wrapped up in this case. And one thing I think I just want to highlight for people is there's actually philosophers, epistemologists that are working specifically on the question, and I mentioned this briefly already, who should we believe in the case of rape accusations, the epistemology of rape accusations. And one of the sort of paradoxes they talk about is this he said, she said paradox, where she says he did it, and then he says I didn't do it. And one thing that's interesting about cases in general, I don't actually think Ravi's case, I'll talk about that in a second, fits this model exactly. But the stakes are high on both sides, right? Because if he actually did do it, then that's really important, and we should find that out, and we should vindicate those victims, and we should take that power away from him, and get justice. But on the other hand, if it's a false accusation, that's also, the stakes are high there. You don't want people being falsely accused of things they didn't do, obviously. So that's kind of the paradox that these people are writing about, and they're asking the question, when there is an accusation, who should we believe? So I guess what I wanted to say first is one of my friends, her name is Georgie Gardner. Georgi is how you spell her name, Gardner. And she is a epistemologist at the University of Tennessee. And she has like 5 or 6 papers on this. She actually sent them to me, and I read a bunch of them yesterday, and they're really good. So if you're interested in this issue, I would highly recommend her work. Another person whose work I want to recommend, her name is Michelle Panchuk. She's at, I forgot what university it is, but she works on religious trauma, and she works on how religious and spiritual abuse plays a role. And I think this is really applicable to Ravi's case, especially in light of some of the things we were talking about, where he would pray with victims and use the spiritual language to just totally manipulate them. So Michelle has some amazing work on that. That's really good and really interesting. So those are 2 people, if you want to learn more about this, I would highly recommend going and checking out their work. Some of the things I've already mentioned, but so I'll mention briefly, but I wanted to make a couple points about this kind of epistemology of rape accusation stuff. And I was reading and looking at some of the literature in the past few days. But one thing that I think a lot of people aren't really aware of is that there's actually this statistical evidence on whether, when people make a sexual assault or rape accusation, if they're telling the truth. And they've done studies on this. There's empirical evidence on this. And here's the bottom line. That evidence actually indicates that around 5% of these accusations are false, which is staggering. So that means in most cases, these women are telling the truth. And as a caveat, of course, that doesn't mean they're always telling the truth. That doesn't mean they never lie, but it just means it's really uncommon. So if you want, I'd be happy to send you a bunch of these studies, but the largest ever study of rape claims was done by the Home Office Research Study, and the number's 293. They investigated 2,643 claims made to the police, and only 216, which is 8%, were classified as false. But other studies have shown that the number is as low as 3%. So I think it's really important and interesting to keep this in mind, because this is actually really relevant when we're looking at these accusations. Women don't lie about this nearly as much as you might think. That doesn't mean women never lie. That doesn't mean you don't even know someone that's probably lied about this. But I do think this evidence is relevant and important for these cases. And I think one thing that's important to note too is when a woman makes an accusation to a specific person, so this person raped me, that is very likely to be true. And what the studies show, kind of interestingly, is that when you make a general kind of accusation. So someone raped me, but you don't point out a specific victim. Those ones aren't as likely to be true as the case where a woman says, this person in particular raped me. So I thought that was kind of interesting as well. So the main thing I wanted to say here is don't ignore the base rates here. I'm happy to provide links to these studies, but I really want people to keep this evidence in mind as we're learning from Ravi's case and as we're thinking about when to believe victims and when not to believe victims. And then a point I kind of already made, but I just want to reiterate again, is that there is a lot of cost to making these accusations. It's more than people think, and there's a strong incentive for victims to remain silent. So we talked about some reasons for that already, but I think that's also really important to keep in mind. And then the final thing I wanted to say about Ravi's case in particular is, like I said, a lot of this literature is focused on these he said, she said cases. But Ravi's case is not a he said, she said case. It's a he said, she said, she said, she said, she said, she said case. And Georgie, I can send you some of this if you want, but Georgie has a paper where she talks about when it's he said, she said, she said, she said, she said, the probability that all those women are lying is just astronomically low. And there's a lot of, solid epistemology work in probability theory, but also in different epistemic frameworks, we can model why this is a case where we have to take these victims' accusations very, very, very seriously. So that was kind of the first thing I wanted to say, and that's just a brief summary of some of the literature, but please check out Georgie and Michelle's work if you're interested in this. There's just a lot of really cool work being done. The second thing, oh yeah, go ahead, Cam.
Yeah, I just wanted to get your thoughts on so how should we then, given what you just said, how should we approach these kinds of cases? Should it be met with skepticism, or should it be met with, basically being on the side of the victim, the person who's making these accusations? How should we then, given this information, how should we approach these types of cases? And this is a kind of general point, not specifically related to Ravi, but what should our general, just thoughts? How should we approach, given what you just said?
That's a great question. And it actually brings up another point that Georgie made in one of her papers, which I think is really interesting, which is that when you think about what a he said, she said case is, it's basically she says this happened, he said this didn't happen, and we don't really have much more evidence. We don't really have other background evidence or evidence that she has ulterior motives or he's done this to other people or whatever. And what Georgie says is this actually style of case is actually pretty rare. In a lot of cases, there's either multiple accusers or we do have some background evidence. And so there's actually not a lot of pure he said, she said cases in real life. And so one thing to say in answer to your question is we just need to look at all of our evidence, and we need to look at, where does the evidence lie? What does the evidence point to? And not what do we want to be true? Who do we want to believe?
Right.
And realize in the Ravi case, of course, there's some evidence that he didn't do it based on, who he appeared to be and who he claimed to be. But we have to remember that isn't decisive evidence. That doesn't, establish that he didn't do it, especially in light of these base rates that women are really unlikely to lie. And again, these base rates don't establish that women never lie. They don't establish that we should just believe them no matter what. Of course, but I think a lot of people just aren't aware that women really are incentivized not to speak up, and a lying, especially when you say this person sexually assaulted me or this person raped me, is very rare. So I think it's good to keep in mind there's not one answer to everything, except for that follow the evidence and really ask yourself, these are emotionally charged issues. So am I believing this because I want it to be true, or am I believing this because that's actually what the evidence supports?
One thing you said a lot earlier on is that the cost is so high on either side of it, because if it's true, if the allegation is true, then this person is an abuser or possibly even a rapist or whatever. But on the other side, if it's false, then people who think that, or not even if it's false, but people who think that you're lying, then you're now a liar in this person's eyes. And that's a cost for someone not to want to come out in the first place. So I find that really interesting. I mean, it's a sort of a related point here. But Elisa, do you have any thoughts before we move on to Liz's second point on the
Well, just very
epistemology of
quickly,
testimony?
I'll just add this very quickly. I was kind of looking in the chat, and several people were saying, there's no video evidence, as so we can't believe it or something. But if you read the whole report, if you even go back and watch Mike Winger's video, there were hundreds of photographs, there were texts, there was emails. There's really just, even beyond the testimony of these women, there is just a lot of evidence. So there are photographs, there are texts, there are emails, and you can go look at all that stuff.
He also was researching how to say different like sexual things in different languages, and they corresponded to like the places that he was at, and they found these on his phones. And those were only the phones that they had access to. The phones that I think during the Lorianne case, the phones during that time just disappeared, like they didn't exist anymore. Which think of that what you will. But the point is that there's a lot more evidence than just testimony on both sides, which we're about to get into the value and the epistemology of testimony in just a second. So we'll get to talk about that. And that also relates to something that Mike said in his video, and we're just going to expound on it, basically relating the testimony that we've got in this case to the testimony that we've got in the case of the resurrection, and that in both cases it's largely built on testimony. And so as a Christian, there's some tension here. If you want to believe testimony in the case of the resurrection, but you don't want to believe it in the case of multiple independent, witnesses attesting all to the same thing or very similar things. So why don't we go ahead and turn to that now, Liz?
Yeah, definitely. So I wanted to make a couple points about the epistemology of testimony. And, the main question sort of in the epistemology of testimony is, when should we believe someone when they tell us something? And one thing that I think isn't always obvious at first blush is that we rely on testimony all the time, way more than you probably think. I actually have a video that I made about testimony that's on my YouTube channel, and I give a ton of examples of this. But the upshot is, we normally take testimony at face value. If your mom's like, I had cereal for breakfast this morning, you'll just believe her. You're not going to question it. You're not going to go look for more evidence. You just believe her. If a person on the street tells you the train station is that way, you believe them, unless you have a reason to think they're lying or they're misinformed or confused. We just believe people's testimony. And most epistemologists, not all of them, of course, it's philosophy, everyone disagrees, but most epistemologists think this is generally rational. People are generally reliable, and unless we have a
Okay, it looks like we paused for just a second, but yeah, you were saying unless we have some kind of reason to doubt.
Yeah, so unless we have some kind of reason to doubt that they're telling us the truth, we do believe them, and most epistemologists think that can be rational. And so I think, in the Ravi case, of course, like I mentioned before, you might think, well, look, Ravi had this apparent character, Ravi had this thriving ministry, and, maybe that is some kind of evidence he wouldn't do this sort of thing. But then on the other hand, you have to consider all of these independent witnesses, many who don't know each other, describing the same kind of experiences. And this testimony is just so epistemically significant. If we just believe a random person on the street when they tell us where the train station is, why would we not believe all these women testifying to the same thing independently of each other? And then again, keep in mind all the costs associated with coming forward, and the base rate, the fact that it is really rare for women to lie about this kind of thing. So the point here I want to make is, we have overwhelming evidence that these women are telling the truth. And then the final point, which Cam kind of alluded to already, is that I do think our evidence in this case is parallel in some sense to the evidence that we have for the resurrection of Jesus. You might say, well, in general, at least, resurrections are unlikely. It's not something we're going to just posit that happens every day, that's occurring all the time. But in the case of the resurrection of Jesus, we have these witnesses that are testifying to the same thing. And I think these witnesses testifying to the resurrection, that's a huge part of the reason that as Christians, we believe in the resurrection, and we take this to be rational and supported by the evidence. But I think, notice, this is a very similar structure to Ravi's case. And I think the lesson that I want people to take from this is that we need to be consistent across domains. We shouldn't believe evidence, believe testimony in one case because we want it to be true, but then disbelieve it when the only difference is that we don't want it to be true. And also, when we're kind of evaluating someone's testimony, we should also consider the statistical evidence. Is there, what does that say about the likelihood that they're lying or not? And that's relevant to considering this as well. So I wanted to bring this up partially just because I think, A, people aren't aware of the statistical evidence that women really are unlikely to lie about these things. But B, I think it's not always, we don't always realize how much we rely on testimony all the time. And testimony plays a role in this central tenet of our faith. So I think given those things, there's just overwhelming evidence that these women are telling the truth. And sometimes we have to believe things even though we don't like them and even though we don't want them to be true. And that's just being epistemically responsible. We should follow our evidence where it leads. So it sucks. Yeah. It's hard. It's terrible, but that's the reality of it.
And I wanted to say that because I was sort of distanced from Ravi and I wasn't like a real big, he wasn't one of my intellectual heroes or anything. Maybe that's, psychologically one of the reasons why I was able to take the allegations a little bit more seriously at the start, because I didn't know so much about him. I didn't have, and the way that I think about it, Liz, is that I had a kind of like, or people can have a kind of evidence that weighs in the other direction, right? Because you can have all of this evidence of his good character. He's a good Christian. The things that he says and he writes in his books. How could someone who's doing these kinds of things be guilty of that? How could their character just looks so good? And so you'd have evidence on the one hand in defense of Ravi, but on the other hand, you've got the evidence against him from all these independent eyewitnesses. And I think, Liz, what you would say is that just because someone's character looks on the face of it good, I mean, kind of the point of this whole thing and what's so crazy and disgusting about it is that he was able to manipulate everybody, including his own board, that he was completely innocent of these types of things. And so he was like a scammer at that level. And so you would expect a scammer like that to appear godly and to appear a certain way. And so on the hypothesis that he was manipulating all these people, that's actually like what we would expect. So you can't necessarily use that in this case, I don't think. And especially on the other side of it, if he was an abuser, then this is exactly the kind of evidence that we would expect. Several different independent eyewitnesses, all of the stuff that we found on his phone and everything, which I don't think that there's a whole lot of people that are doubting it at this point. But for the people that were doubting it, suppose that this investigation hadn't have gone through and we didn't have all of this additional stuff. Just the fact that there are these independent people coming out, I think that to me is more than enough evidence to start to go that. So yeah. Any thoughts on that, Liz? And then Alisa, I want to give you a chance to share any thoughts you've got on it as well.
Well, I was just going to say on the point of him being this master manipulator, really. You see that in these women's testimonies as well, the ways he would groom them and he would slowly ask them personal questions and ask for prayer requests and then just kind of push the line slowly. You see, I think, and
even like financially support them.
Yep. Oh yes. And then, yeah, exactly. Pay for them to go to massage school or pay for them to take trips or whatever. And I think that too just points to what a master manipulator he was. He was able to deceive so many people, and it's absolutely devastating. And it means like we need to be careful. We need to be careful with these figures that we uphold as our heroes. That part of the reason they're so famous, and in a lot of cases, is because they are really good with people and getting what they want. And you can use that to God's glory. You can use that's a gift that God gives people, but it can also be used for horrible, terrible things. And so it's just a warning to all of us to be careful.
So yeah, Elisa, any thoughts on testimony or anything else that we've talked about?
I mean, I don't have anything really more than I've said to add, other than I'll just kind of reinforce the point that was just such a relief for me when this investigation was, because I'll be honest, I wasn't sure I was willing to give RZIM the benefit of the doubt, let them complete the investigation before commenting. And I wasn't sure if they were going to kind of, because we don't know who the board is still. I think we still don't know, but I didn't know if they were going to just sort of circle the wagons and protect. But when they came out and said, the investigation's not quite complete, but we can confirm that it's true. I just can't tell you what a relief that was, and what, just as truth people, for Christians watching this, we really need to be truth people. And so that the multiple eyewitness testimony is something that I'm so thankful that God allowed for all of that to come out. Because Liz, you're right. It's like our Christianity is based on a historical event being, or at least it's built upon a historic event being true. In reality, that's Jesus' resurrection. If that didn't happen, then Christianity, for all intents and purposes, is false. Paul says this when he says, if Christ has not been raised, your faith is in vain and you're still in your sins. And we rely on that eyewitness testimony. And so you're right. We need to be consistent as Christians. And so for that, I'm thankful. I'm thankful that this was exposed. I'm thankful that that the truth came out in a way that vindicated Lori Ann Thompson, vindicates all these other victims. And I'm hoping to learn. I'm hoping to encourage pastors, apologists, public Christians. Let's be thinking about what we can do to ensure that we're not, none of us are above hiding, our sins or trying to protect ourselves. Mm-hmm. So what can we do to be transparent, be accountable, and mainly, like you said, we want to make sure that these victims get help, get healing. And so we need to be thinking about all those things, I guess is what I would say.
Yeah, that might also be a good sort of note to end on. So why don't we just, Liz, any more sort of thoughts that you've got that you wanted to share before we end this live stream? And then Elisa, I'll give you another chance to add anything that you like after that, because just to make sure that you guys get anything out that you need.
Yeah, while Elisa was talking, I was thinking too, if anything, our evidence in this case that Ravi's guilty is even better than our evidence for the resurrection, because of the fact that there's this hard evidence on the cell phones and the pictures and all of that. And so I think if we believe in the resurrection as a central tenet of our faith, we have even more evidence of his guilt here. And so I encourage, just like you said, let's seek truth. Let's find the truth together. Let's follow the evidence. And it's hard and we don't want it to be true. But if it is true, there's a lot of things that we need to do and a lot of things that we need to learn. And it's going to be very difficult to do and learn those things if we sit around in denial. So like Alisa said, we empathize with the victims. And I love that you just said, Jesus loves you. He does. And you're not dirty and you're not, we don't look down on you. You're beautiful. And I so admire the courage of the women that came forward for this report. It's amazing. And it's so hard to do that. And I think it's, I don't even realize how hard it is to do that. It's so hard to imagine how difficult it is to speak up. And so your courage hopefully is enabling all of us to grow and to learn from this. And it's bringing the truth out. So thank you. That was basically what I wanted to say.
Elisa, any more thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just kind of end with, one of the things in the report that the independent company that did the investigation basically said was they didn't actually even go overseas to investigate all of the activity that potentially happened there. So they were just trying to get enough evidence to show that this was true, and that's what they were hired to do. And so there was a bit of a scope to the investigation that they had. That being said, what that tells us is that most likely there are going to be lots of other Ravi victims out there that we don't know about, victims of Ravi who may be in other countries, who it could even be that things will start to come out, like more Ravi victims will start to come forward even over the next several years, maybe. And so at the end of Mike Winger's video, he basically said, if you're a Ravi victim and you want to email, we will do our best to connect you with whoever we need to connect you with to help just bring restitution, healing, and all that stuff. So I'll just offer that same thing. I know Cameron and Liz would offer the same thing. If you want to email in to us, maybe put in the subject line Ravi victim or something so that it catches our attention. But I have an email contact on my website. I can't get through all of the, I don't respond to all of the emails that come there because there's just so many. But if you'll put something like that in the subject line, I will do whatever I can to connect you with the people that can help you. And I know that Cameron and Liz would feel the same way. So,
Yep.
we want to advocate for you, and we want you to be okay. And so I just think as the years go on, we're going to see a lot more Ravi victims. And this has only just begun, really. I mean, this whole thing is just now gotten the lid blown off of it. So there's going to be a lot more fallout. There's going to be a lot more things. But I would just leave our listeners and our viewers today with, just know that Jesus loves you. Jesus is real. Christianity is true. It has an answer and healing and hope for you, no matter where you land on all of this stuff. So that's how I would leave the people, I think.
Yeah, and I wanted to just to reiterate what you just said, Elisa, that if you are a victim of Ravi and you wanted to get in contact and talk to somebody, again, I would definitely check out Mike's video. He's got some great things to say, just for victims and people who have been victims of abuse like this. So I would highly recommend watching that. But then also, if you need to get in contact to somebody, I'm going to have a link to like an email address or something in a pinned comment in this video. So you can just go down and check that out and get in touch with whoever you need to so that you can start your healing process. But yeah, I mean, there's not really an easy way to end out this live stream other than to say I really appreciate both of you coming on and just being open, sharing. And it's not easy to talk about something like this, but hopefully this helps people. All right, and with that, we will see you guys next time. So see you later.